one thing that I think is potentially useful about alignment in that mechanical sense is that I think it can be a handy role-playing aid for beginning players. It can be a decent jumping-off point for them to understand how their character interacts in the setting of the game. But beyond that, I think that, well, in practice, what I often see, even though it's not meant to be this way, and I don't think it was ever meant to be this way beyond first edition era, is that alignment is played as a straitjacket. I cannot tell you how many times over the 35 years that I've been gaming, I've heard variants on the argument of, your character is lawful good. He can't do that. And that boggles my mind, because it's a person. It can do what it likes. And should a lawful good character, for example, participate in or knowingly allow torture to occur to a prisoner to extract information? No, they shouldn't. But should they be restricted from doing so? No, they shouldn't. As the GM, what I would want to see is if that player of the lawful good character knowingly engages in or allows torture to occur out of necessity, or what they've been convinced is necessity, that's okay. That can happen. But then I want to see the player have the character play out the guilt that they're feeling because they went against what they feel is right and wrong.
Agreed. I'm a big fan of alignment mattering when it matters. In times like that, Superman doing the right thing every day is normal. That's what he does. But when Superman's up against General Zod and he has to decide whether or not he's going to kill him this time or not, is everyone worth saving, even that guy? Now what?
Exactly. And I think that a big part of it is that, frankly, see, I'm very much a storyteller GM. And the games that I run are much more about the plot and character development than anything else. And I feel that one of the things that we're trying to do is we're trying to, in a fantastic situation and environment, replicate how real people would react, how real people would behave. And the truth is that, in my estimation, people are far more complex than being able to have their moral code pigeonholed into a two-letter code.
Yeah.
Often people find that morality is situational. And people are far more versatile than that. And so I feel that distilling it down that way, it almost removes some of the freedom to role play. And I get where this comes from, because, I mean, I've been playing D&D since, my first D&D experience was the Purple Box Basic Set in OD&D.
Nice.
So I've been doing this a long time. And first edition was a different animal. First edition was a very adversarial system. It was very much set up from the mindset of the game is the GM versus the players.
Very much so, yes.
The DM's job in first edition is to corral and control the players. But as gaming has evolved as a hobby, we can even see it in the types of games that are being produced. Once upon a time, all games that existed used D&D as their template because it was the only game that existed. But as time has gone on, gaming has really started to evolve into less of a simulationist style and more of a narrative style, where it's more cooperative storytelling than the nitty-gritty of me versus them and the mechanics of the game. Those are there and they're important, but they're not the key thing anymore. And the only time that I generally enjoy any kind of mechanical element of morality is when it's setting appropriate. In Middle-earth, there is a clear dividing line between you are working for the light or you are working for the shadow.
Right.
And in Cubicle 7's Adventures in Middle-earth 5e port, they don't use alignment as D&D does, but your character can fall to the shadow. but it's not based on your alignment. It's based on your character's actions. What your character does. If your character participates in a murder, or steals from people, or threatens others with physical violence, those are things that accrue shadow points, and eventually your character can fall to the shadow. It works in a setting like Middle-earth. It works in a game like Blue Rose, where there's a very clear dividing line between the light and the shadow. But in an average swords and sorcery style setting, to me, it doesn't feel realistic. It feels like it's almost a forced motive for characters to act or not act, rather than an organic motive for them to act or not act.
I'm particularly fond of the idea of morality as a slider. That's how I recently ditched the idea, but for a long time I ran with the idea of a number line for morality. There's a 0 at the bottom of the page and a 6 in either direction. I actually use a system almost identical to the one Professor Dungeon Master uses in his alignment video. Mine, the idea is that everybody starts at 0, and when you do a truly selfless thing, when you save the princess, let's be passé for a second and say you save the princess, and you go to bring it back to the king, and you go, no, that's
for a reason.
Right, that's okay, I don't want the sack of gold, her safety is all the reward I needed. Great, have a morality point. If you do that again next week, I will not give you another morality point for it. That's normal. You're going to have to do something more noble than that. If you're Hannibal Lecter and you eat somebody, that's gross, but it's what you do. So I'm probably not going to give you a point of morality immorality for that beyond the first time. And when somebody swings all the way to number 6 in either direction, they will have had to go out of their way to make that happen. When they do that, you'll either become, at that point there'll be enough encounters under your belt. We'll know what's campaign specific to happen to you. You become an evil god, you become the next Mother Teresa, whatever. But if this means that if a truly selfish individual at 5 does a truly selfless thing, they go up a point in the other direction. You almost turn morality into a currency, which is why I got rid of it.
I kind of like that more fluid nature. That's similar to the way Fantasy Flight Star Wars handles morality, where you can go up or down according to your character's actions, and you just start at a baseline morality where you're not particularly moral or particularly amoral. It depends on your actions in game.
Right. If a player chooses to play a cleric or a paladin, somebody who D&D would, in its traditional sense, would consider lawful good, I'll give them pre-give them. I'll set them at 1, not 0. Right. And if for some reason you're hateful and corrupt out of the gate, I'll set you at a -1. But from there, you're on your own. The reason I got rid of it is once players, no matter how many numbers are on that line, 3, 6, 20, whatever, once they get towards the edge, you'll watch players deliberately change their actions so they don't have to give up their character sheet.
Right. They start to game the system.
Right. And I was like, okay, well, then the reason I did that was just to introduce the idea to the character that they had permission to play how they wanted to play. So once we've addressed that, I just got rid of the morality bar, and I'm like, look, here's, like at phase 0, here's the deal. You're all people, everybody. Consider it Games of Thronesy, right? Some serial killers are really, really great to their parents, right? Like, whatever.
Well, that's the thing to me. That's part of what makes alignment feel so flat and unrealistic, is because saying, this is my alignment, basically you're saying, you're stating an extreme. And no one really generally exists all the time at the extremes. Life exists somewhere in the gray middle area. And you have situations where I don't feel that, and again, it's a very 1E attitude, but I don't feel that as the GM, my place is to direct how my players play their characters.
Agreed. I think a great GM...
the world reacts to what they do.
Of course.
There are consequences for actions, but it's not for me to sit there and go, you can't do that because your alignment says this.
If you want to kill that helpless victim tied to a post, you do that. You should probably be aware that At some point, someone's going to notice.
Yeah, murder has consequences in most societies.
Yeah.
Maybe not drow society so much, but
I gave this example to a friend of mine the other day, and he called me earlier and was laughing about it, and I think that's really cool. We were talking about the possibility of player murder and consequence, PC murder and consequence. Player murder is wrong. That's real murder.
yeah, that's a different animal.
And he pointed out that, is it possible to create a scenario in which the players slaughter everyone and leave no witnesses? And I said, absolutely not. And he went, oh, and I said, well, think about it. Everybody knows somebody. So the players go to a little hamlet, let's call it Joetown, and they slaughter all 12 people who live in Joetown. But one of the people who live there is Joe Jean, who is Joe John's aunt. Joe John comes from another town to visit his aunt and finds that his aunt and everybody in that town is dead. So Joe John does what is necessary, and he goes back to his town, devastated, upset, talks to his priest. His priest comes back to the town, as he probably will, because he's probably nervous about a whole town being burned to the ground. He finds Joe Jane, he casts Speak to Dead, and Joe Jane tells the priest, in no uncertain terms as a fact, who killed her. Joe John goes to see the king, right, of the local area, and he says, hey, did you know there's an adventuring party moving across the map, killing everyone? And the king says, no, I didn't know that. Now I do. They're going to pay for that.
Time to hire more powerful adventurers.
Right. In a world with magic, of course there are consequences. Come on.
And the truth is that in the example that you just gave, even if everyone was killed in the town was burnt to the ground, all the remains were destroyed, there was no means of identifying anything or anyone that had actually occurred. In your standard D&D setting, guess what? The gods know what you did.
Right, yeah, even if somehow you can prevent the raising of the dead enough to do something like Speak with Dead, which is possible, then yeah, chances, even the gods notice.
The gods notice. Gods know what you did, and perhaps the patron god of that town informs their clergy in a nearby city of what occurred in that town.
Like, hey, did you know? Can you imagine Athena poking somebody, one of her clergymen, going, hey, did you know that Athens just burned to the ground? I'm a little irritated about that. You want to take care of it?
Yeah, exactly. Someone always can find out. We're dealing with magic. You don't have any limitations there.
So I guess I think what you're saying is that you're not opposed to the existence of morality, just not as a color.
Yes, and the thing is, my problem with alignment is actually not that it exists. It's how I frequently have seen it employed in games. Because even if you look at alignment mechanic, especially in 5th edition, where they clearly have recognized that mechanical alignment is falling out of favor, because in 5th edition, there are 0 mechanics attached to alignment.
Right, there's no mechanical, it's not like... Yeah.
Protection from good and evil now protects you from fey, undead, and other planar creatures. It's not evil alignment. The mechanics are going to affect. The only weird place that I've seen that alignment actually has any effect in 5e is against the Rakshasa, where a good aligned character wielding a dagger can damage them.
I see.
That's just a weird place, and it's easily avoided, easy to write out. But yeah, because often I find it's employed in an almost draconian way, where it's, again, that straitjacket that you can't do this or you must behave in this way. And that's not a realistic interpret. Do what they do when they do it for the reasons they do, and then they deal with the consequences afterwards. I
am the only person I know who lives in an absolute way of thinking. I catch a lot of shit for it. A lot. I'm like, look, no, murder is wrong, no matter what. Theft is wrong, no matter what. Yeah, even that guy. Like, I live in a very, very black and white way of doing things, but I also don't have tons of friends because of it. The friends I have, I would risk my life to save, but I'm not what you call a normal member of society. I'm autistic, so neither am I. And everyday life disagrees with the way I do things. I just refuse to give it up. I've been called a paladin by my friends, and that's one, very incredibly sweet, and two, a great deal of pressure.
Yeah, sure.
But I absolutely agree that the average person isn't like that. And there are days where I wish I wasn't like that. I could just ignore the universal right every now and again.
And the truth is that even you, I'm sure, could be pushed to extremes.
Oh, I imagine that day just hasn't come yet. Yeah. Like I've said this before, that if I came home and my wife was being attacked, I don't imagine she needs my help. She's pretty awesome. But should that day come, I've kind of already decided that whoever's attacking her is going to be in the ground. And I'm okay with carrying that guilt around with the rest of my life. Am I sure I'll feel guilty about it afterward? You bet. In the moment, though, I think you're right. I think no one is that black and white. The world, and I think entertainment as a whole, is beginning to agree with you in a much bigger way, because Game of Thrones is hyper popular and is super gray.
Super morally gray.
In a post-Game of Thrones world, everybody's okay with a Jon Stark. And
Game of Thrones is basically a world populated by awful people doing awful things to each other in an attempt to gain power for themselves.
Oh, yeah. It's... Oh, my God. I've read the books. I haven't seen the TV show, but I'm aware that it's exceedingly popular.
I can't think off the top of my head of more than one single character who actually appears to be relatively flawless morally, and he dies right quick.
So, in your games where you have your interpretation of the morality system, which is to say no mechanical weight, how do you deal with a paladin or a cleric who, say, you have a paladin who worships a lawful good god? Let's get boring again. How does that paladin can he lose his powers? Is there any arrangement? How do you handle that paladin's ness if for some reason he turns his back on his god's ideals?
The way I handle that is basically each deity, each divinity that might in that fashion has a code of behavior that they expect their adherents to abide by.
Of course.
And breaking that code of behavior can lead to instances where the paladin loses their abilities or needs to atone, but it's dependent upon the deity, because a neutral good deity would have relatively different tenets of belief than a neutral evil deity.
Agreed. But if I guess what I'm saying is there a mechanical... Go ahead.
I would say even within the good arena, a lawful good deity and a chaotic good deity look at the world differently.
Oh, yeah.
And so they would have different tenets for their followers to abide by.
If the followers then don't abide by them, they just lose their powers, they suffer a deficit. And I'm not suggesting that's morality strictly so much as a prearranged code of ethics by which you'll live by. Which I don't think are morals in the same sense, because I'd like to think that morals come from the individual, not the outside stimuli.
Okay, I see what you're saying. I actually look at that a little bit differently, and what I've always said is that morals come from the society. Morals are what the society says are right and wrong. Ethics are personal.
Okay. So, okay. Well, if we're going to look at it like that, then ethics are individual. My ethics and society's morals I disagree with often.
And for myself personally, in most instances, my personal ethics agree with the society's morals. Don't steal, be honest, don't kill people. These are things that my ethics and the society's morality agree on. But there are places where the society's morality and my ethics disagree, and then I tend to follow my ethics.
So if you have a cleric who is worshiping a lawful good god, now are we talking that the god's personal ethics are lawful good, or does the paladin have does the paladin? Sorry, I just stuttered there for a second. Does the paladin only have to care about what his god says, not necessarily the society in which he is currently living?
Well, if you're using alignment, by its definition, lawful good means you're supposed to be following the laws of the society in which you find yourself. Again, in my D&D games personally, I don't even use it. I've ditched alignment. In fact, I ditched alignment during 3rd edition, which is kind of a pain, because it was still mechanically tied into the game.
I guess what I'm asking is, how do you handle... I don't want you to feel like I'm putting you on the spot. How do you have...
That's the point, isn't it?
Yeah, but not necessarily to make the other person feel uncomfortable or to change their mind.
You're not making me feel uncomfortable. Please, if you're trying to get at a specific thing, keep digging until you get at what you're looking for.
Excellent. Just checking. If you have gods, even if you don't have the traditional morality system, if you have characters at all who have been charged by higher beings, who have divine powers because they believe in someone or something to such a degree that someone or something certainly has a code of ethics to live by. How do you handle that in your game mechanically? I guess I don't understand how the absence of an alignment system, how you can cram that in the same space as people with divine powers.
Because the player of a cleric or a paladin, dependent upon, picks a deity, picks a divinity from which they derive their abilities.
Right.
And that deity has a code of behavior that I hand in a written form to the player.
Oh, excellent. So it isn't strictly alignment on the character sheet or in the 5e book or whatever, but you do have...
No, but yeah, in instances where the character's power is tied to a divinity, or in the case of a warlock, to their pact.
Right.
Their patron certainly has the ability to say, well, if you want access to my power, you'll follow my goals.
Right, my house, my rules, right.
Right. So the player is given, here is the hierarchy of sins for your divinity. Here is the code of behavior you're expected to abide by. And if the character steps out of that code, depending on the severity of the infraction,
of course,
they may lose access to certain of their abilities temporarily. They may lose access to certain or all of their abilities until they have the opportunity to atone for their sins. Or if it's a serious enough crime and the deity in question is strict enough, they may simply be cast out with no chance of redemption.
Well, this isn't necessarily attached to this conversation. I want to know, how do you have a preordained amount, ordained, do you have a decided amount of gods, specific gods, or do you let your players say, hey, I want to worship so-and-so?
No, in my home setting, I have a specific pantheon that, because one of the other things that I've never really cared for in D&D, honestly, is every race has its own pantheon and own creation story, and they're all supposed to be valid. So I do the kind of the classic, closed pantheon, where this is the pantheon of deities. There are, in my setting, I think there are a dozen of them, and these are the deities that exist. Everybody acknowledges that these deities are the deities that exist. Everyone acknowledges that this is how the world was created. Different races may refer to the same divinities by different names, but it's all the same deity.
But ultimately, they're the same 12 gods, right?
Yes.
Okay. See, I do that differently. As a standing rule, my world only has a fistful of gods, just enough that I could pin the creation of the world on them. But I've always been a big believer that if you believe in a god, if I believed in Cthulhu as a god, if I had a shrine or whatever, however you would worship Cthulhu, if I believe in him that much, he exists at least a little bit in the universe I'm a part of.
That is also something that's in my... Yes, I actually do that in my setting as well. Divinity is somewhat fluid and is based on belief. Rather, there are the deities that existed from the beginning of time, etc., that were part of the creation of the world and so on. But divinity is also relatively fluid and powered by belief. I have literally had players in the past encounter things like, oh, here's a cult of people out in the wilderness worshiping this giant spider that lives in a cave nearby. Because they worship it so fervently as a god, it's actually developed some degree of intelligence and a small amount of divinity.
Nice. If If a player, I just keep a lot of notes. So if a player comes to me and says, "Hey, I really, I want to have a priest who worships Thor." Great. Thor didn't previously exist in my world, but he does now. And
So yeah, there is a certain room for that in my setting. If a player comes to me and says, "I don't want to worship any of the existing gods. I want to create this god," that can be worked into the setting.
Nice. I
They'll
was
never
always
be a major divinity. They won't be on the same level as the deities that were involved in the world creation, but they still are divinities and they will exist in the world.
see the only way I have that happen is when they start out with a minor divinity and theoretically scale to a full size one, is when a player spends a player character spends like a lifetime convincing other people in the world state that their god is better. That they're like, look, no, they're real. Here's proof. I had that happen. I had a PC spend. He was very careful and very deliberate. I run a pretty noble. I think it's Noble Grim. No, that can't be right. It's a rough game. Players almost never make it to level 6. Its hit points are lower. The whole thing is super homebrew and super harsh, and it's so much fun. But anyway. Thank you. I had a PC go out of his way to spend years convincing various cities at a time that the Morrigan from Irish mythology was a real goddess and like walked amongst them and everything, and spent probably what is hundreds of thousands of gold on various ruses and tricks and this and that. And that character believed in the Morrigan very much and was upset that no one else did. And had a very low-key, very subtle holy war. And by the end of it, something like 100,000 NPCs had agreed that the Morrigan was a god. So the Morrigan became a god.
I would absolutely allow that to happen in my setting.
And right before that character died of basically old age, I had the Morrigan appear before them. And I'm not going to be so as generous as to say thank them for their service, but something along that line. A very
acknowledged.
Right, barely acknowledged that if they had lived another 20 years, they might have gotten an attaboy. and they loved it. so the Morrigan's a god in my world now.
In fact, in my setting, the divinity is fluid to the extent that deities can and have been killed and mortals promoted to replace them.
I was just about to go there next. If divinity can be gained, can it be lost by lack of worship?
Yeah, absolutely. There have been gods' wars in the past of my setting where certain deities are no more and mortals were tapped. Okay, you're going to take over this one's portfolio.
Nice. That's really cool.
That was the goal of one of the campaigns that I ran early on in the setting, was the characters straddling a line, not sure who was on the side of good, really, because they had one organization trying to help them preserve the gods, and another organization trying to convince them to help them to take down some of the gods because they felt that the gods were being oppressive in their behaviors.
Oh, this is excellent. We're about out of time on the show, but I would love to touch base with you again at some point in the future.
I would absolutely love to. I've enjoyed talking to you.
Excellent. Thank you. You too.